Hello, everyone. In this lesson, we're going to look at something new. This is a kind of material similar to what was used in the Middle Ages. It's a type of dyed and nailed fabric from medieval times. This technique is pretty unique, and you'll hardly ever see it in modern times. But it's really useful for making things like our medieval or ancient projects. This kind of thing still has its advantages, okay? So I'm going to share with everyone how this case was made and at the same time help reinforce your basics. All right, okay. So here we're still going to follow our overall production approach. If you've seen the previous production methods, then you should already have some understanding. Basically, we start with some small elements. We begin by working on the small elements, and after finishing those, then, as you can see, we start with the tiny rivets, and as we move into the middle stage, we can create some patterns that look like background textures. Then here, we first use a compositing method that goes from bottom to top, layering from the lowest level up. We gradually composite like this, and finally, we add the small elements we've made, like the tiny rivets. And then there are some small stitches. See those little stitches? Just add them in, and that's it. Here, we're doing some color processing. Now, let's take a look at how this example was made. First of all, it uses something called a Fletch's generator, which is basically a scratch generator. In Chinese, it's called a scratch generator or scratches generators. This tool can generate a lot of scratch-like effects. Let me create a default scratches generator node for everyone to see. Scratches generator, by default, it looks like this. This is the default appearance. Then you can adjust its parameters to change it to look like this. Which specific parameters do you adjust? Let's take a look. Over here, we can see it. The general idea is to stretch it out, then enlarge it, and then offset it at some angles. That way, you can create this kind of effect. Next, we can take a look at how the original version of this was made. Did you notice? First, we need to adjust this curve. Let's go ahead and rotate it, right? Then over here, we add the most important parameter, scale, spline scale. We enlarge this. Let's stretch it all the way to U5, really long. See? These scratches here, they've been stretched out really long, stretched out a lot. And then this, the scratches have a random rotation value. If you don't turn it up much, the random rotation is minimal. So you'll see they're all going from bottom to top, right? If you set it higher, they'll rotate randomly like this. Of course, just a little bit is enough. All right, moving on. It's the size plus the random scratches, and that's how you get something like this. Okay, let's see what else we can add. For example, the width of our scratches, right? Let's see, we've changed it. If you set it to 3, the scratches become really wide. What else do we have? Let's see. And here, this is the random rotation set to 0.08. Found. Are there no more parameters? The width isn't quite enough. It's still a bit too narrow. Fade mode, if you set it to long, what does fade mode mean? Let me explain it to everyone while we're at it. We can see it if we shrink it down again. This way, it's easier to observe. I'll lower the rotation a bit, just to this level. For example, with fade mode, if we set it to start, you can see that it creates a gradient effect from the starting point to the end point. If you set it to long, then each line just has some differences in grayscale. Actually, when we're making this, we don't really need it to have any special effects. Of course, we can improve it a bit. Let's make this one definitely bigger. Then we can reduce this effect a little bit. Just tweak it a bit. This way, there will still be a bit of a gradient in there, which actually looks pretty nice, right? So we can use it like this. And if we reset these numbers, basically there's not much difference compared to not having it at all. What is this thing for? This thing serves as our kind of small felt, a little red line. It serves one purpose, but it can also be used for something else. It can also be applied to some of our watch dials. All right, let's stop here for now. As for this part, if you've watched the previous lessons, there's no need for me to go over it again. All right, this is just a simple shape level transform. Basically, we can stretch it out, okay? Just stretch it out. Then add a level adjustment. Let's darken it a little bit, and that's it. Next, here we apply a long uniform blur to make it a bit more blurred. Then we add another level adjustment. What's the purpose of this? The goal is to create a soft gradient around the edges while keeping the center very bright. This way, we can use an add subtract algorithm with our element here. With this, we have what we need. We get this kind of edge with a subtle color, and the center is quite white. This gives us that result, and then we adjust the levels here again. Basically, we're pulling the contrast toward the center, increasing its contrast. And finally, we use this as a mask, as a black and white mask. We put the mask into our opacity, and then the foreground is our messy hair in the front, which represents the white areas, while the secondary light represents the black areas. Okay, so for the black areas, it will keep this part as it is, and for the white areas, it will keep the messy hair. By combining them like this, we can see that we can adjust its values. For the A color areas, it'll display this part, and for the white areas, it will also show our messy hair. But as for the messy hair, there will be an opacity limit on it. So there is a way to control it. But if you completely remove the opacity, it will show our background, the B side. So let's put it this way. This is the F side, and this is the B side. Foreground and background, F side and B side. If you set it to 0, it will give us the effect of the B side. If you set it to 1, it will create the effect of adding opacity on the A side. Of course, we need a combination of both, a combination of the two. So let's set the opacity a bit lower, okay? That way we get the effect of adding opacity on the A side. And we also get the effect of the B side. It's like we're on top of the opacity effect on the A side, we've also added this kind of textured pattern that gives a sense of volume. With that, our little Jia Wong is finished. And this part here is also very simple. This gradient linear, a level gradient linear uses gradient linear too, which means both the top and bottom are black. And then here, what we're mainly doing is increasing the black crank a bit. Then we lowered the contrast a little, and here we used a multiply blend to press down the top and bottom edges, and then here we transform. It's actually really simple. Just rotate it 90 degrees, then move it zero point 0.5 units to the right. That way, here it lines up with what we originally had, and then Max Lighten, that's how he made a little cross-shaped fuzz, a cross-shaped bit of fuzz. Then, right in the middle, the two dark areas can have this kind of subtle overlapping relationship. This looks pretty good. Okay, and next, let's take this. After rotating the little fuzz 90 degrees, actually, you don't even need to rotate it 90 degrees. Just move it along the x-axis by zero point 0.5 units and it'll be right on top. Then add another max lighten, and now you have these little bits of fuzz both above and below in a cross shape. Okay, and now here we're also going to set the x. Both the x-axis and y-axis, that is our original x and y-axis, are shifted by minus zero point 0.5 units, or of course you could shift by zero point 0.5 units. Either way, this fills in both sides around it. With this, our basic texture is done. But this kind of basic texture, when the range of applications for this in our fabric work is extremely broad and diverse. There are many ways to create this kind of basic texture. You can do it like this, for example. You can use a tile generator or a tile sampler. Either one works. But the layering method we're using here is relatively easy for everyone. This is just one way to understand it, so we'll do it like this, all right? Okay, next, let's look at this row. What is this row doing? What is it doing? It's making our small stitching lines, because these tiny fibers can not only be used as the base texture for our tile, but also as the base for our small stitching lines since they're so tiny. So we don't actually need it to be very clear. You see, we can use the same elements. Of course, if you need a close-up, you can also enlarge it a bit. All right, and over here, let's test it out at home. Let's take it and make it a bit smaller. And then here, after we squeeze and compress it down, good night. And then we can, for example, here, if you multiply by 2, it gets bigger, right? Then if you divide by 2, divide a few times, you get this small stitching line effect. Then use transform to make it horizontal. Then, for the horizontal numbers, use max Latin, and then use tile generator, tile generator. So now I want to explain a bit about horizontal numbers, okay? As a single element, if you repeat it like this, one by one, right? If you put one on top and one on the bottom, doesn't it create a kind of cross pattern? Right, a cross pattern. And actually, the tile generator doesn't really do much. It just repeats along the x and y axes 6 times each. 6 times. Nothing else was really changed. We did adjust some offsets. Why do we need to change the offset? Because I want this part to line up exactly with the edge here. Look at your x-axis. If the offset isn't set, then the whole tiling image won't line up exactly with this edge. So here you can set an offset or not, it doesn't really matter, and then save. Track means we're making sure our object maintains a seamless, four-sided continuity. You can rotate it 45 degrees, or not, or even rotate it to 57 degrees. That works too. Then over here, we set a level. As to the level, we just drag these two values down to when it Clear black and white, right? Clear black and white. When you're making some brushes, you can also use this method. For example, with a stitching brush, right? We can add another little hole here if we want. Okay, at this point, we're basically done since what comes next involves other areas, bringing in the nodes. So let's take a look at the second set of nodes, the cross lines. We'll just set them aside here for now. Just like cooking, we'll chop up some green onions and set them aside for later. Okay, next, let me explain this part to everyone. This spot happens to be the line we had earlier, this one in front. So connecting this line over here, right? We use a safe transform grayscale, which is basically like taking our paper. See, tile means we're repeating it continuously 10 times over. Then we use this tile generator. Here we have a tile generator grayscale, tile generator. Grayscale, here we're using something. Let me explain this node to everyone. I think everyone shouldn't be unfamiliar with this. It's just that the way it's used might be a bit different. So what we're using is a half bell, which is basically a semicircle. Here, what we do is it's like we're setting its quantity to be really, really high. The quantity is high. It's 64 pairs, right? So here we just set it to 64. And over here, how about 6,144? Then here we can also add some like x-axis shrinkage, for example. Random shrinkage along the x-axis and random shrinkage along the y-axis as well. Right, and here we add some variations in size like this. Why does it sometimes flicker here like stars? That's because it's using a random offset, and the offset is random. Then here, we also add some random luminance, random brightness. This is the most important part, random luminance. And then there's something called a random mask, which randomly selects here. Some nodes are chosen to show or not show with the random mask. There's probably nothing else, right? No other parameters that we haven't seen. There's also position random, which is randomizing the position. You can randomize the position along the y-axis or x-axis, making it wiggle randomly. Gundam offset can be set to 0 or whatever value you want. Just see what effect it gives, right? Look at this corner of our table. Okay, so why does the image still look a bit different? Maybe it's because of the values here. When it comes to the values, we don't recommend that you absolutely have to make everything exactly the same as this. There's really no need. All right, just adjust things based on your own judgment and preferences. Just set a value that feels right to you. That's actually the original intention behind the design of this software. It's not about making all the numbers exactly the same. As long as it's like this, that's pretty much good enough. Like these small circles and those small circles, aren't they basically the same? There's really not much difference. Even though the numbers are different, visually for us, there's really no difference at all. So don't stress about memorizing these values. Then there's random mask, random numbering, random offset, and random scale. Those things. I've already talked about these in previous lessons and examples. They've all been covered before, so make sure to go back and review them, okay? Next, we have HQ blur. I probably don't need to explain what HQ blur is, right? It's just high quality blur, advanced blur. Then, when we multiply these two things together, it's like we get these little dots with dashed lines. See? These small dots are created by the dashed lines, and then it gives this kind of overlapping echoing effect, okay? Then it mixes with some of our small dots. So how do we get those small dots? Again, it's the tile generator. Basically, this number just means we're raising the mask value, the random mask value, pretty high. And then we set our scale to make it relatively small, and it'll create this kind of scattered speckled effect. So compared to what we want to export, right, then we add a level, give it a level adjustment. We brighten up the darker areas a bit, and then for these two elements, we first add a max lighten. Max lighten. This way, you'll get some of these gray tones. Add some small white highlights as noise dots on top of the gray noise. Of course, you have to make sure your gray areas are larger and the white ones are smaller. There needs to be a size contrast. Otherwise, if your gray areas are too big and bright and your white ones are too dim and small, it just won't look good if you do it like that. Make sure there's some layering. Okay, let's get this ready for later use. Then here, we've added a level adjustment, added a level. We're raising the shadows, which basically means we're adjusting the grayscale value of our base texture. We've raised it up and now it's ready for later use. For example, now we have a few things prepared in advance. One is the thing we just worked on, and another is our small grid. Now there's one more thing we've prepared in advance, which is our little square. In this area above, there's a small square. We need to prepare a backup, one shape node. Here, I've added a parameter to give it a pyramid-like feel, then set a level to squash it into this shape. As for the tile generator, I won't go into detail here. We just need to repeat it 6 times, so there's no need to do anything extra. We don't need to do any random variations or anything like that. And here, maybe add a little offset so it fits perfectly in the center. Next, we'll add a save transform here, just like how we handled it earlier. Also, pay attention to the tile generator. The offset here is 0.085, same as the 0.085 over here. They need to match up. They need to match up. Why? Because these two things have to fit perfectly on the foot. So when these two parameters are linked between these two nodes, and the rotation values for these two nodes, 57.99 here, and it should also be 57.99 over there. So these two numbers need to be linked together. That's something to pay attention to, okay? Then make a backup. That way we have one backup, actually two backups. We have three backups and then four backups. See this element group? Our approach is still to start with the small elements first, then move on to the larger elements. Okay, now we're going to do a second round of processing on these small elements, a secondary refinement. So first, let's create the background pattern, the base texture. For this, we're using tile, save transform, and save transform. Y'all should know this. We're going to tile it, apply a tiling effect. Although this tiling might be a bit much, in my course we probably wouldn't tile it this heavily. But for this example, you're just learning the method. Alright? Don't do it. Don't tile it this much. Next, we have a warp node. I've talked about warp many times already. Basically, that's what it is. It works around the white values. These are called white values, and the black ones are called black values. When it works around the white values, it expands. When it works around the black values, it contracts. So it has some expansion and some contraction. You see, it creates some different effects. We can take a look, right? So with this, some small elements expand and some small elements contract. And before, there was no change here. This is what's happening now. This is a very common and frequently used technique when we're working with fabrics. Be sure to remember this when choosing background patterns. Usually we use Cloud 3 or BNW, black and white, or black, white, white. This one works too, or you could use BNW2 as well. Of course, we might need to add some HQ as well. You can also add some HQ and a bit of blur to create a puff effect. These are all commonly used nodes. All right, next, over here, there are a few more branches. Let's not look at these things for now. I'll first organize this area so everyone can see what we're doing. We'll group this part right here because I'll be sharing this file with everyone later, okay? All of this will be provided to you. So we're gonna group these small elements together. This way, it'll help everyone clarify their own thought process. ADF. All the ADFs are here, this one too. Together, these are the four small ADF groups. And this is our basic group. Then over here, all right, so for this group, we have our BMW Cloud 3. For Kelly Mountain, we've actually done some blending here, some multiplication. What's the purpose of multiplying? The purpose is it's to give these small things, these little metal blocks, a bit of brightness. We can see the changes in the values here. You can see here the brightness is around 0.8, and over here it's about 0.5, right? Because we multiplied it by this kind of black and white noise map, so the brightness might change a bit. That way, each element will have some small differences. This step is absolutely crucial for making our fabric. Then over here, we add a slope blur. Earlier on, I think I mentioned it in my previous example too. It's basically to make it slide. If it goes out, it probably won't reach where it needs to be, so it's better to adjust it. IO sampler warp. Warp. After that, a few points are added, but not sure exactly where. Go Quets generator. These four things seem kinda interesting. Let's take a look. I'll break it down for everyone. Not sure what this is. I don't think I explained it. This is also a small element I haven't really talked about. Let me explain it to everyone. It's actually pretty simple. We just use a tile generator to make a small square-shaped piece. You can just use the brick element to do it. Then here, we'll just increase the size a little bit. Don't mess with the random lumens. Nothing special. Six squares, a small corner of a grid, okay? Then save transform, SQL blur. Then blur it a bit and add a level, and you'll get this kind of mesh structure. This mesh structure is used to create those indentations between the seams, right? There will be some indentations between the stitches. That's what it's for. So it needs to be perfectly aligned with what we did earlier. So in the safe tile generator, Google FC doesn't have it. But you have to remember that this number is 6 by 6, a 6 by 6 grid. Okay, and this is non-uniform blur? Non-uniform blur. Earlier, I explained to everyone that it's basically the white areas. They'll get a kind of blur effect, while the black areas will stay the same. That's basically how it works. I covered this in a previous lesson, so make sure to check it out. After this, since I'll be going through these topics faster and faster, you all really need to understand the earlier material, so I won't repeat it. Now, about the intensity here, let's turn it up just a little, just enough to make it a bit blurry. That should be good. Now, let's combine things and see how this part looks. See what works best. There's one here, there's a cloud 3 here, a cloud 3. Let's first combine it with what we had earlier, like we just talked about, right? After cloud 3, let's first pass it along with our smaller sequence in order. Now here, you can see there are some scratches, right? This is the slot blur. You can see it here. Some small changes in these scratch-like marks, slot blur. And why is that? It's because over here, he added another one of these gratis. It's just a really messy line, a messy line. We can take a look at its parameters, 512, 128. Let's check them out. Rotate at 180 degrees. And then the only difference between this line and the one we had before, what's a bit different about it? It's that the fade mode is turned on. Yeah, the fade mode is on, and then its thickness, the thickness scale, isn't very long. It's only set to 1, and then the randomness is set to 0.5, and then directional random and distortion. What are distortion fingers? If I copy these points for everyone, you'll see distortion fingers basically mean that our lines get twisted, right? The higher you set this, the more twisted it gets. And then spin distortion random is basically like it's also a kind of distortion. It's the intensity of a random distortion. It's the amplitude and frequency of a random distortion. These two are different things. And then as for thickness, I won't go into that. Okay. This one is basically a random variation in size. In short, just turn up the randomness for these parameters. Set it according to these values and you'll get this effect. Over here is HQ blur, and here we've applied a slot blur. The goal is to randomly create some tangent-like lines in this area. Let's see if we can increase this a bit more. Even if I make it more obvious, you still can't really see it. It's just not that noticeable. There are some small details, like these little metallic bits on the side. These small dents are created using slope blur. This node here basically achieves that effect for us. A black and white image is used together with this one as a slope blur blend. Then we can compress our side details. These small, metallic, welded dents look much more realistic this way. Just think, if you wanted to sculpt this by hand, right? Sculpting so many different little metal pieces would be a huge hassle. But in SD, we can handle this problem really well. Okay, then the next step is over here, then the next step here. For the next step here, what we're basically doing is copying these two. Copy and blend, then adjust the blending amount. Here, you can make adjustments. This is a function, specifically the blending amount of the function node. You can see that we set it pretty low. Set it pretty low. This part will look brand new, just like what we had before. And then if you want it to look a bit older, right? If you want it to have some dents, that's the intensity of the slope blur. It'll be higher, right? And you'll see some small dents in there. So let's increase the opacity because opax 0 displays the B channel and opacity 1 displays the F channel. Okay, so this is basically our rivet. The rivet is already done. It's ready as a backup now. All right, this is the finished stage of the rivet. I'll add a frame to it. Then over here for the generator, we also need to add an HQ blur. Besides using this for creating some minor wear and tear, we'll also use it later on up here. Let me take a sip of water. Okay, let's take a look at this boundary point. This is basically where we apply HQ blur to all the messy stuff we did earlier, and then combine it with the indented base we just made. Actually, when we're making the indented base texture, we're also working on this at the same time. These little raised blocks of ours, right? You can also think of it that way. But if we make these raised blocks too flat and even, the pattern looks way too regular. For example, we might add one here and subtract one there. Subtracting a small piece like this is pretty effective, but then on this surface, there will be some fine little wrinkles and folds. Even though you can't really see them because they're pretty shallow, if we make them deeper, they'll show up more. Speaking of these fine little wrinkles and folds, that reminds me of something I recently found. As a reference, it really feels like the texture you see on the cloud patterns of Hanfu clothing. So you definitely need to learn this trick when making your own Hanfu. When you're working on cloud patterns, you can use this method. Let me find you a relevant example. Here's a reference. We need to be clear in our minds about where to use what we've learned. Besides resembling this, it also looks like, well, the reason might not be that obvious. These small dents, right? They're not very obvious, but there are some clear reference images. It also has a feeling similar to what's called meow shoe embroidery. With meow shoe embroidery, the fabric tends to be thicker and feels like it's double layered. But if we try to simulate this with MD, creating that double layered effect can be pretty troublesome and won't be as detailed. So what we can do is add some of these small dents on top of the MD simulation as a base. To make it really look like this kind of meow shoe embroidery, all we need to do is adjust the shape of the dents a bit. Just tweak them a little. That way, it'll have even more detail. Right? Like this one, yeah, this one is kind of like that, right? It's sort of it has that kind of cloud-like feeling. Some cloud patterns are just like this. But this is a description of a leather piece. I think it's not really called a cloud pattern. And then it will have these small dents, which we can replicate. This kind of thing is actually really useful in certain situations. Everyone really needs to learn this trick, okay? And then moving on over here, we added another SAP track. So what is this SAP track for? It's actually another scratch generator, a scratch generator. We made it horizontal, turned it into a horizontal one. Here are the parameters. I won't go into detail about these parameters. You can check them out yourself. Basically, what does each parameter mean? I believe if you try them out, you'll figure it out. For example, fade mode, or things like random start, random position, random width, then a random direction, and a random frequency. Then size is basically the size, direction, length, and width, rotation angle, and then random rotation angle. And then there's the quantity, and that's about it. Those are pretty much all the parameters. Then here we give an HQ. After giving HQ, it's like I made one horizontally here and then made another one vertically over here. So basically, there are two directions like this. There are two directions of blur. One blur is added here, and another one is added here as well. Okay. Then here we apply a level adjustment to tweak its height a bit. We slightly lowered the highest part. There's really no way to copy this, guys. When you work on this yourself, you can do it your own way. Just adjust it according to the actual needs of your image. Okay, then when we get to this part, we can see that we can bring over the small stitching from earlier. Bring over the small stitching. We used the small stitching from before and we made some more changes. What changes did we make? You can see that with the small stitching here. Since we have a black and white area, there's a small black ball. We actually want to make use of that small black ball. Let the end of the stitching be exactly where it's pressed in. It's really pressed in, so compared to the previous image we saw, if we multiply this with the previous one, we can get an image where the center is darker and the edges are brighter. Of course, if this thing is too dark, that's not good either, so we do a label restoration to bring it back. After this restoration, then we can here we add it back in and we use max to do it, etc. If you want it to be more obvious, you can make it bigger, right? If you make it bigger, the stitching will become more noticeable. Just a bit. Whether you make it bigger or smaller is up to you. Use Mark Stanton to blend it in. Blend them together. And why can Mark Stanton blend them so well? It's because our base image, originally this thing is actually black, while Mark Stanton is white. If it's black, it won't show up. So we're adding a bright little stitch right in the dark area. This way, we can make sure that every stitch is visible. Then over here, we also added, what did we add here? We added a little base texture, but we haven't used this little base texture yet, have we? What we're using is a histogram range. After warping it here, we use that. Range is basically used to adjust the contrast of the base texture. Hence, the range node is used to adjust the contrast, making it look a bit more muted or grayish. We don't want it to look too three-dimensional, okay? So here, we just use a copy node to add it in. You can see here, if we set it to 0, you can see that there aren't any of these little base textures. But if you copy and add just a little bit, it'll add a little bit, and if you give it a bit more, it'll add a little more. But once you add it in, remember, for the copy node, you have to keep in mind setting it to 1 leans more toward F and setting it to 0 leans toward B. So when you set it to 0.19, your B side will definitely be weakened. It will definitely be weakened a bit. So the A side, B side, this F side, and B side, they achieve a dynamic balance through opacity. You have to remember this point. So with this setting, basically, we've finished our base adjustment, right? Okay, and then next, we've added some small details here. What we added inside are those little spheres we just made, those little rough spheres on the surface. Here, we also use a soft light node. I've explained to everyone before, this is a node that makes the image brighter. But the way it brightens is only the bright areas of the image will get brighter. The dark areas won't. So for our image, the brightness increases, but only above zero point 0.5. Brightness above zero point 0.5 will get brighter, but brightness below zero point 0.5 will not change. So as you can see, after adding soft light, the effect actually isn't very noticeable. Yeah, there's a little bit here, right? A little bit here and a little bit there. The effect isn't particularly obvious. It's just adding a bit of detail. That's all. Of course, besides using soft light, we can also use add, right? So let's try adding with add.